Welcome everyone to edTrends. I'm Dr. Rivera Wilson, and today's session is Teaching in Remote Learning Environments. This session is made possible due to our partnership with the Capital Region BOCES. I'm Dr. Jerry Rivera Wilson. I'm the Director of Professional Development and Continuing Education with the Academy for Advancement of Teaching Leadership in Schools, better known as ATLAS, within the School of Education. I'm going to turn this over to my long-time colleague, colleague and friend, Lynn Wells, Dr. Lynn Wells.
Thank you so much, Jerry. It's great to be here and to talk about teaching in remote learning environments. And as Jerry said, I'm Lynn Wells, and I'm the Special Project Administrator for a 10 Regional Information Center Consortium on TRLE. And during our session today, we'll share the background on how TRLE began and what needs the grant has been addressing and what it will continue to address. In a few minutes, you'll hear from the grant administrator from the New York State Education Department to discuss the grant in detail. The topics that the grant will focus on are shifting to teaching online learning, families as partners, students with disabilities, English language learners, and/or multilingual learners, culturally responsive education, social emotional learning. And by the end of the session, you will know how to sign up for some free training across the state, and you will hear how to access these materials. Jerry, if we can go to the next slide with everybody's picture on it, that would be great.
And before doing so, let me just share a brief video of our upcoming sessions on edTrends.
So I'm going to introduce each of the panelists and tell you a little bit about them. The first one is Paul Cardatino, who is the Teaching in Remote Learning Environment Project Coordinator at the New York State Education Department. Paul has had a vast array of positions in public education. Throughout his time at New York State Education Department, he has overseen the development of several trainings for educators as part of this grant. You can visit the New York State website that has the TRLE materials, and we're going to drop that in the chat, and you can learn more about that program. The next person that we'll hear from after that is Katie Jones, and she is the lead on the online learning core competency section. Through her position with the Warren, Saratoga, Washington, Hamilton, Essex, BOCES, WSWHE, Katie works as the Assistant Director of School Improvement and Assessment. Katie assists the 31 component schools in analysis of their various data, understanding ESSA, implementing data-driven instruction practices to increase student achievement, among other projects. Next is April Francis Taylor. She is the lead on the culturally responsive core competency area. She is the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusivity at the Eastern Suffolk BOCES. She's an advocate for equitable systems and a regional education leader with over 17 years of experience. April has served as a teacher, building district administrator in the Long Island and Westchester regions. Additionally, due to her advocacy for equity, she has served on the New York State Education Department Culturally Responsive and Sustaining Framework Committee. She has served on the New York State Education Department Civic Readiness Task Force and the New York State Democracy Ready Coalition. She has also served as the Vice President of the New York State Council of the Social Studies. She is a recipient of the Nassau BOCES Educational Partner Award, and she has been cited in many educational publications. Next is Dr. Mike Dowdy. He is the Assistant Superintendent for the Northeast Regional Information Center at the Capital Region BOCES in Albany, which is one of 37 educational service agencies in New York. Prior to this role, he was the Executive Director for statewide projects at the Capital Region BOCES. Mike also served as the Deputy Superintendent of the Greece Central School District. He was also the Deputy Superintendent of Monroe 1 BOCES in Fairport, New York. Izzy Galant is a lifelong educator, author, and speaker, and has taught and served as an instructional coach for the past 30 years. He's a nationally board certified mathematics instructor and also a mentor. He has his used his extensive experiences working on curriculum writing and training with teams at some very large organizations, the School Board of Broward County, the University of Central Florida's Math and Science Professional Development Team. This past year, Izzy partnered with Stony Brook University Center for Teaching and Learning to help train 3,500 teachers during a 4-week period in best practices for remote and hybrid learning. On the heels of this experience, he was invited to serve as the project coordinator for the TRLE evaluation team. And finally, Emily Popek is our public information specialist with Capital Region BOCES. Emily oversees the digital content aspects of the eTEACH New York project, ensuring that the materials developed by the 6 content partner teams are presented in accessible formats. She makes this all come together for us. So I want to welcome my colleagues that are on the panel, and I want to let you know that you are in the great hands of great leaders and people with experience. I'm going to turn it to Paul. And Paul, I'm going to ask you to talk about what is TRLE, and what do educators that are here or people who are not here but need to hear about this need to know?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Lynn, and thank you for allowing us to be a part of this today. This is really great. So TRLE stands for Teaching in Remote and Hybrid Learning Environments. It's a program from State Ed that is born out of the Rethink Education Models grant, which was part of the CARES Act. And New York State was one of 11 states, just 11 states to be awarded federal funding through the CARES Act and through this grant specifically, through the Rethink Education Models grant. It launched TRLE in New York State, and we've been working since, I've been working on it since December. State Ed's been working on it since last summer in one of our first phases of the grant. But basically, we are focusing on building educator capacity throughout the state in teaching in remote and hybrid learning environments, with a special focus and on our most vulnerable populations and our hardest hit areas in the state from the pandemic. So I invite you all to view the website, which I put in the chat already, to learn more about the program. There's a lot of information on there and some professional learning events also. But again, we did have an understanding that our most vulnerable populations needed special help. So that's why when Lynn read off the different core competencies that the grant focuses on, you'll see that that there's a focus on equity and there's a lens of equity that's always the case with any program with New York State Education Department. But I really also want to focus on what's helped this program evolve over the last few months, which really are our partnerships, our really important partnerships that State Ed has forged, including with our external evaluators at SUNY Stony Brook Center for Teaching and Learning and Community. And I know you'll hear from Izzy a bit later on their role and what they're doing for TRLE, but they've been fantastic partners, as have been our level 1 centers. So we've partnered with Lynn heads up a consortium of 10 RICs that are focusing on a rapid infusion of professional learning into the field right now. And in addition to Lynn's group, there are 2 other RICs, Winnie RIC and the lower Hudson RIC, as well as 2 school districts in Yonkers City School District and the New York City Department of Education, who are also our partners in this work and who are also delivering professional learning and creating professional learning resources for the field that are available at no cost to all educators in New York State. And this means all educators at public schools, non-public schools, public charter schools. They are available to all educators at no cost. So that's an important thing that we want to get out to all educators, so that you feel comfortable signing up for our trainings and registering. So we are happy about that, and we're looking forward to future partnerships as we get into the later phases of the grant as well.
Great, thank you, Paul. Can you follow up and just talk a little bit more about the short-term and the long-term goals, so teachers and educators or administrators know this isn't going to end in September when hopefully we bring kids back. So can you talk about that a little bit?
For sure. So in terms of short-term goals, that's where our partnerships with the level one centers have really been strong. So our short-term goals is really a rapid infusion of professional learning to the field, focusing especially on those 6 core competencies that Lynn mentioned up top. I'll say this right now, that the quality of these professional learning resources and events has been astounding. So I encourage you to sit in, to register on these professional learning events as a part of this initial phase of our program, where we're trying to rapidly infuse professional learning and to build that capacity for teachers to teach in dynamic environments, remote, hybrid environments, and also, you know, some learning from the program as well, from what are the lessons learned. And transitioning to the long-term goals of this is really, we want to identify those lessons learned. So we're hoping that those lessons learned will that we've all learned throughout the pandemic, from teachers to administrators to parents and students. We're hoping that those lessons that they can bring to us and give us feedback on and input on will lead to what we call a quality remote teaching, remote and hybrid teaching framework. So some guidance from the state on best practices in remote and hybrid instruction and in dynamic learning. So we're hoping to gather a large group of folks throughout the state to help us build that framework. And we'll be doing that really starting in the summer and into the fall, and having that then inform several other professional learning opportunities going forward. So our long-term goals really focus more on sustaining these practices that have and some of the skills we've all developed and the learnings we've had over this last year, ensuring that we can sustain those practices so that they're enhancing instruction going forward in New York State. So really that our long-term goals are focused on sustaining these practices by creating that framework, and then creating several professional learning opportunities around that framework and around those core competencies that we mentioned also. And also involved in sustaining those practices, really rethinking models of education in New York State, and partnering with some institutions of higher education so that we can infuse what we've developed in the QRT framework and some of these other lessons we've learned throughout this past year and plus to ensure that those practices are in the higher education programs, teacher prep programs, and administrative prep programs as well.
Great, thanks, Paul. I know we're going to hear from you as the session progresses, but really good work and exciting work.
Thank you.
We're going to move to you with online learning, certainly an essential part of the core competency areas. And, you know, every time we get together, we talk about this. It's been a year for all of us, and especially for teachers. So can you share with us the biggest challenges to good instructional practices in the remote world that you and your team have found and what you've been sharing?
Sure. And thanks for the opportunity, Lynn, and to Jerry. So, you know, as we all know, we're teachers and educators by trade. And so challenges come to us on a regular basis, whether we're in face-to-face land or we're in this new paradigm of remote learning. So I think if I were to take away the little things that we always see and not constitute them as challenges, but just those things as the day-to-day kind of things that we deal with and we overcome. If I weed those things out and I look at the biggest challenge, I think the biggest challenge for education and for our teachers this year has been this large concept of remote learning, but more specifically about the concept of hybrid learning for our teachers. So if you look at our traditional classrooms, they're really used to kids face-to-face, being able to interact, build relationships, create an environment of a welcoming nature. And when you strip our teachers of that foundation, of that place for our kids to be every day and to feel comfortable and to know that routine, when we strip our kids and our teachers of that that world, and we put them into this box known as hybrid land. And then we have to reconstruct what a classroom looks like and what our day-to-day practices are and what the consistency looks like. You have really taken the rug out from underneath our teachers, our administrators, and our students. So I think that concept of hybrid learning when, or even the concept of full remote learning is a real challenge to our teachers. And it's not because they don't have good foundational practice, that they don't have good knowledge and good experience and skills. It's that this is a foreign world to them. Our traditional education setting has been four walls with desks and people on a particular campus or in a particular room. And so that concept takes away all of that structure. It takes all the way that comfort of what we have known in our careers and in our experiences. And so we don't have people who are sufficiently trained to understand the basics of a classroom. The basics of attendance taking in a remote world, or the basics of good instructional practice as far as when we're talking about kids beaming in at different times and entering the classroom and understanding that beep in the Google Meet or in the Zoom means that a kid came in or a kid left. And oh my gosh, which kid was it? Those basics have really gone away. So giving our teachers that time to have acclimated to this new world, giving them just the opportunity to have experiences. We know that good instructional practice doesn't just come from being in a 4-year or a master's degree program or a certification program. It comes from experience. It comes from trial and error. And for us to have made this very large shift in this very short amount of time, for us to have accomplished what we have accomplished is just amazing in the world of education right now. And so I think the challenge for all of our teachers and for our kids is they've never had the experience or the time to kind of percolate, so to speak, in those worlds. And just the concept of time. Again, we left and were told that we were going on this trip for 2 weeks, and that 2 weeks never ended. We're still there for some of us. And so it's really, if you really think about it, it's really a remarkable accomplishment to have seen what our teachers have been able to do with the supports that we've been able to provide them, because nobody wants to enter a classroom and not be successful. We want to enter and provide kids the best experience possible. And so through TRLE, through the bucket that I oversee, the shift to online learning, and then my colleagues who oversee the other 5 areas, we've really just tried to provide that critical support so that this challenge isn't a true challenge. It's just something that we embrace and we run with.
Great. Well, you set me up for my next question, which is, from what you've seen and heard, what are the biggest successes that classrooms are experiencing in remote learning? Because I've heard some parents, some kids, some teachers saying they never want to go back because they've had success. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So I think one of the buzz phrases or the buzzwords right now is learning loss. And I'm going to try to get to shift people's thinking and say, you can't lose something you never had. And so with that concept, I want to think about it in that glass, not half empty, but half full, and say, I think our teachers, our administrators, our kids, our parents have had immense learning curves occur this year, 18 months. So we're not going to necessarily, I can't speak and give data that supports, a 1.5 years worth of reading growth without having specific instances to be able to look like. I know that has occurred. I've looked at some of the, universal screeners and progress monitoring tools to say, what, kids are keeping themselves afloat. They're maintaining their grade level exposures that they should. But I will say we need to look at those things that we traditionally haven't looked at. So what social emotional competence has increased in kids? What level of independence? How are they troubleshooting? What are those 21st century skills that we never really looked at in a hard core way that kids have gained? What about their technology competency? I would tell you that if you asked any parent, their kid knew more technology before this whole thing happened than they knew. But their competency now is just so much greater, and it's so much more technical. It's not about, the emoji or the crazy extraneous things. They can get onto Seesaw and they can find the link to their classroom, and they can get on at 9 o'clock when the teacher tells them they have to be there, and they can have their other document uploaded and ready to share when it's their turn in the opening circle. It's the fact that teachers have learned an immense amount of new strategy. Many are going to be tool-based with technology, with Seesaw and Canvas and Nearpod and all of those extra things. But by virtue, and I'm going to say it, and people will cringe, but by the gift of COVID that we received, in the sense of we were forced to take this on, and we did it, and we knocked it out of the park in many cases of embracing an opportunity. And nobody wishes a world pandemic. I don't want it to come off that I'm being flippant in that manner, but we certainly need to see the positives. And I think the thing is that our kids and our teachers have learned an immense amount, and we can't deny that by saying there's an immense amount of learning loss, because I think if you were to look at it, you'd see something different.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to switch over to April. April, culturally responsiveness. There are a lot of teachers in our trainings that are going to those sessions. It's some of our most sought after trainings. Can you share what the goal of the culturally responsive teaching is, and why CR teaching strategies are so essential every day in the classroom, but even more so in remote and hybrid instruction?
Yes, definitely. Thanks, Lynn, and thank you for having me here this afternoon. Those are excellent questions. And one thing I really appreciate about this grant is that it allows all of the buckets that we say, our English language learners and multi-language learners, and our students with disabilities, our social emotional learning, as Katie was talking about, our parent engagement, right, to all of those buckets to interconnect. And this is truly seen in the CRSC area. So the New York State Education Department created the Culturally Responsive and Sustaining Education Framework. It was adopted by the Board of Regents in 2018. It really, as Chancellor Young stated in his recent April memo, it is a call to action. This framework supports diversity and equity and inclusivity across our state and our school systems. So it's intended to help education stakeholders create student-centered learning environments that affirm cultural identities, foster positive academic outcomes, develop students' abilities to connect across lines of difference, and elevate historically marginalized voices. So we know that equity and the practice of cultural responsiveness is a focus in many schools today. Our society has shown that this is needed, and that though this is also, needed at the same time as we're going through a pandemic, this shift to remote and hybrid instruction has created an even greater need. Addressing issues of inequity and ensuring that all students have what they need to succeed can seem a bit overwhelming when students are not physically in the classroom. And even talking about difficult topics such as implicit bias and microaggressions is very different virtually. So our modules were created to be a tool to assist in closing the opportunity and achievement gaps our society and this pandemic have really created in our school systems today.
Great, thank you. So what are some of the practices, April, that you've shared in the materials that are on the website that teachers or administrators can have access to in the trainings that help our educators understand what a culturally responsive classroom looks like, whether it's in person or virtually?
Well, here at Eastern Suffolk BOCES, we partnered with the educational technology company IDE Core and NYU's Metro Center, who has many years of foundational work in culturally responsive education, to develop an electronic toolkit to help teachers and education leaders navigate the four main principles of the framework. So if you're not familiar with the framework, the four main principles include: one, creating a welcoming and affirming environment. Two is fostering a high expectations and rigorous instruction. Three is developing inclusive curriculum and assessment. And four is participating in ongoing learning around DEI topics. And one thing about the framework is it shows what all stakeholders in the educational system can do to reach these goals. So though it was developed, this toolkit was developed predominantly for students in the remote and hybrid environments, it can be adapted for in-person as well. So our modules, there will be 5 in total, there are 3 already on the eTeach website, are developed with a 3-pronged approach. First, we allow for individuals to participate in a self-reflection. Each module begins with an immersive scenario that helps the learner center themselves prior to moving through various pieces of the module. 2, we developed it as a toolkit so that learners can self-select the area that they feel they need the most support in. So for example, educator A may need to understand the why of CRSC, while educator B may understand the why already and may need support in creating lessons around courageous conversations. And our third approach is that the modules allow for learning in at least 3 different settings. It can be an individual learning, it can be held in a small group, such as in a professional learning community, or it can be held in a larger group, such as a faculty meeting. So all materials can be shared virtually or printed. This gives education leaders the opportunity to turnkey portions of the modules to their staff and adapt them to their specific needs. And I'm just going to ask Emily if she can just bring up our module 1, just as an example to show our group here today. So as you can see with module 1, you have here at the top, if we scroll down, well, how would you feel is our immersive scenario. So if we scroll up a little bit, Emily. Oh, that is, yeah. So the first part of it is how would you feel? That's the immersive scenario. So it gives a real life situation that helps the person self-reflect, right? And then if we look at to the right, you'll see some resources. Anyone can skip and go and read the topics, and we'll look at cultural distance calculator. So here, this lesson here allows you will see an objective, you'll see a printable culturally distance calculator document that you can print and utilize and adapt for yourself. It actually has the questions embedded on the website as well. And if we scroll down a little more, Emily, if we go down or the stop and think, these questions are created to align with teachers or school building leaders or your district leaders. Because as I said, the framework is built for multiple stakeholders to engage with it. And these questions are then centered around which stakeholder group is utilizing this resource. And if you scroll down just a little bit more, Emily, you can see the collaboration piece here. So it says you can complete this cultural distance calculator as a grade level team, co-teaching partnership, or a department. So showing how you can utilize it in different ways. Thanks, Emily, for sharing that. So in closing, I just wanted to share that, we believe by creating the toolkit, we are able to meet educators where they may be on that figurative CRSC or equity continuum, right? And help them through a virtual self-reflection, provide effective strategies, sample documents, and readings to support this mindset shift in education. So thank you, Lynn, for letting me share.
Well, April, thank you. And I have to say, I've been to all the trainings, and no matter where anyone is coming from the state, the way they enter and how they leave at the end is really pretty transformational. And the conversations, and I cannot believe how many thank yous you get from people, because the space for those conversations has not existed. And again, what Katie is saying. All of us would be much happier if we did not go through what everyone has gone through over the last 18 months with the loss of life and, jobs, etc. But at the same time, that space has been created for people to start having those courageous conversations. So again, I would encourage people to use these resources. Thank you. Mike, I'm going to turn to you. And, I work with 10, level 1 regional information centers. What is a regional information center? And what role does it play in this grant? And how would I get information about trainings?
Well, Lynn, I am so glad you asked. Great question. So thanks for including me in this. I think the work is really important. And what I put a couple of links in there. That last one, BOCES.org, can take you to learn more about RICS and BOCES if you don't have a deep understanding. But basically, there are 37 BOCES across the state, and they're organized into 12 regional information centers, which originate back in the day. They were regional computing centers back when we had mainframes, and it didn't make sense to put 37 mainframe computers around the state. So they organized the BOCES under these regional information centers. And NARIC is the largest one in the state, and we cover 7 different BOCES and do a lot of work for school districts and BOCES related to data, state testing, administrative computing services, networks, things like that, student management systems, all kinds of things that go into making schools run from a technology perspective. So the RICS really were uniquely positioned to support these efforts and really coordinate what goes on as part of this grant. So you heard from April, you heard from Katie doing the work in these 6 different areas. Well, the RICS role in each of these parts of the state has been to organize it and to collect the data, to provide for the registrations, to support getting the information out there. So the other couple links in there, I put the eTeachNewYork.org site that has all of the trainings for the entire state that are in our consortium of 10 RICS, and then the NARIC.org trainings, which list all of the trainings that we're putting on in our 7 BOCES region in this part of the state. So we manage the registrations, we collect the data, we kind of marshal the resources and support the individual BOCES as they create the content. And I think one of the things that's really important about this whole concept is that, as we looked at this grant among the regional information centers and realized the enormity of it, it became clear that we didn't feel like any one of us necessarily had the capacity to just do all of this work. And that's why it is a collaborative, right? It's our middle name in BOCES, C, cooperative. So I think, this was really a great opportunity to spread the work out among the experts and then bring it all together for a really streamlined interface for teachers and administrators across the state. And I think that is the beauty of it. It is accessible to not only in the state, but people from anywhere in the world could access these trainings because they're on the internet. And it's been really interesting to see how this has developed. And to your point, Lynn, the quality of what's been developed speaks to the efficacy of this model in terms of allowing the experts to do their work and then bringing it together.
Thank you. And I want to reemphasize what you said about the cooperative, because often as districts and other organizations, we're competing or highlighting ourselves. And I think that in my, we won't even say how many years of education, this is the first time I've really seen where everybody's put something into the pot and has taken away from it. And I think that that is really important. So, we know that districts can use RICS, but in this grant, we also know that non-publics and charters are able to come. But how can a RIC assist me if I'm a teacher and I need something that's not in the core competency areas, but I need something about remote learning? How do I get support?
Yeah, and I would say, your first step should always be to work through your local BOCES, because they're closest to school districts and non-pubs and charters. in terms of the local geographic area, and can often, meet a teacher's needs, pretty close to home. When it comes to things that, require more of an economy of scale, or it's something that an individual local BOCES doesn't do, that's typically an opportunity for a RIC to step in and support and help, bring resources to folks. And those links that I put in, will take you to your individual BOCES, where you can look and see what's offered, or even to the RIC, and you can see the trainings that are offered there. And to Katie's point earlier, this work around remote learning is and distance learning and using technology isn't necessarily new when it comes to BOCES. BOCES have programs that are called model schools, where they have trained teachers and administrators in using instructional technology for decades. Ever since there's been instructional technology, there's been BOCES and model schools supporting that work. So it's nice to see that, brought to the forefront and highlighted, and have folks recognize that we have people with expertise who can support them in this work.
Great, thank you. Izzy, every time we're able to talk and you come to our meetings, or we go to the larger meetings, you're talking about teaching and learning, and it's clear that you're able to express the importance of giving students voice, independence, and ownership in their learning. And this is more important than ever. It's really been difficult for teachers this year to do this by teaching students in a different manner. What can you tell us about what you've learned through all of your experience about best practices based on research for hybrid learning?
So again, as the others mentioned originally, thank you. And thank you for having me as part of this. This work has been so collaborative. I think that Katie's 2-week tour, gave me flashbacks to the Gilligan's Island days, and how much we kind of all found ourselves in so many different areas, and so many different backgrounds, and so many different demographics, but all on the same boat at the same time. And what overwhelmingly has come our way through the research and some of my work, even just around the state with teachers and administrators, is the need for connection before content. And what we saw was the practices, and to illustrate the point that you brought up before too about SEL, the most highly attended workshops so far in this process have been the social emotional learning and the culturally responsive offerings. So teachers are recognizing, in fact, real good teachers are recognizing that best practice starts with that relationship, and with getting to know kids in different ways, and really the vulnerability that has come about, and from a teacher's angle to just share that learning experience together as they navigate through new technologies, as teachers adapt their practice. When we did our initial reflection from the teachers, we had 6,500 teachers that reached out and went through our reflection survey. And of that, over 66% of them indicated that they never or only sometimes used technology pre-pandemic. That is a gigantic number for a full institution that is meant to set the 21st century pace of how we should be and could be incorporating student interest in different ways, changing programming, looking across the state, and having now the reality that maybe we can have a student enter into a classroom that they otherwise couldn't from a different demographic. It's really balanced the equity issue a little bit, if we look at it that way and want to approach it from that standpoint. And so we can take that with us. But back to the earlier question about the best practices, really, it's really about that commitment to relationship, the commitment to connection, the commitment to empathy and understanding in a different way. Then on top of that foundation is what we've seen where the content growth can happen, because then the tools become a little more accessible, the teacher becomes more accessible, in terms of being helpful and reaching out, connecting with families and parents. So really, it's that families connection, it's the SEL and the culturally responsive components of this environment that have been the strongest foundation from which to build on those other competencies.
Great. Thank you so much. That was wonderful to hear that. So you serve as the project coordinator for the evaluation team. What do you hope you will learn from this work and the evaluation that you're doing? And then how's that going to be communicated and turned into best practices in the field? Because I think now more so than ever, something good's got to come out of this. Like Katie said and April said, something good has got to come out of this stress that everybody's been under.
Yes. Yeah. Well, not to get too cliche, but right, the diamonds in the rough are always under the most stress, and it's when we kind of come through that fire and are tested in that way that we really show resilience and have created something new. And honestly, that's my hope, is that as we continue to, we've seen some of it in pieces right now, in part, we're shaking some of the dust, off. Back to the stats real quick. Pre-pandemic, the same percentage of teachers agreed in their, by their own indication, that pre-pandemic, the level of engagement from students was, at X amount. And then it dipped in the spring of last year. But currently, those same percentages are almost identical to pre-pandemic student engagement. So teachers are finding ways for students to become involved. Teachers are finding ways for students to become the center of the learning and to reach out and work together with each other, even in remote environments. I'm getting to watch and observe teachers working in class in a whole different way, with students equally online as in person. And it's just so great to see the diamonds that are coming out of this. So my hope is that we haven't seen all of the great and different ways that we can reimagine education. But that one thing I can say is that we won't go backwards. In my opinion, as was stated here a few times, that not learning from this, not really using this moment in time to adjust practice, at least for now, like take a step forward in 21st century skills and modeling of the way we communicate, the way what we consider learning, some of the project based, some of the real authentic experiences that can happen and have been happening because we were really forced into it. And my hope too is that we will change the way we evaluate the product of that learning, and see how it lines up with more of an authentic learning experience. In terms of communicating that, it's really going to come through with that QRT model, that quality review template that Paul mentioned earlier in this meeting, and in developing that with stakeholders, from parent groups to focus teams of teachers, administrators, leaders around the state, that we will have such a really great holistic outlook on this, and it will not feel evaluative regardless of its term, but it'll truly feel like a homegrown document that is a coaching and development and really a lifelong learning tool to all of this work, so that we can see that sustained throughout, and it'll trickle down into our higher ed and on our subsequent training of new teachers. And as teachers kind of enter the field, they'll see a new norm lived out in front of them, instead of an old factory model that we've been kind of battling against for forever.
Thank you. That's great. And I do agree that teachers are sharing best practices and are continuing to grow through this. Emily, if you will share the websites, the SED website, and also the eTeach New York, Paul will take you through the New York State website, and then we'll go through and you can walk people through the eTeach New York website.
Yeah, so you'll see that we have sort of four larger buckets here on the left side that are broken down into just an overview and some basic data that we've collected. Our core competency resources, so some resources and some links that are aligned to each of those 6 core competencies that we've mentioned a few times here. Most importantly, I would say right now is our calendar and events page. You'll see a calendar of professional learning events from the LINS Consortium, but also those other Level 1 Center partners that I discussed earlier from the other RICs and school districts. So you see there's a ton of programming going on in May already. And again, all of those are at no cost to educators or their districts. Those are totally free. And there's registration links for each one of those events in there, and again, aligned to those core competencies. There's also a few asynchronous events we have posted down toward the bottom as well. So feel free to explore the site, look around, and I know my contact information we'll put into the chat later on. But and then actually there's a 4th bucket there. You can learn about who our partners are through this work. So, and some news on the right side. In a little bit, we're going to have some featured resources on the bottom. So there's a lot of information about the grant. If you have questions, this is a great resource to get them answered. And if you're looking for trainings, this is our calendar events page is where to go to find those registration links, find the trainings that really matter to you, and where you feel you need some assistance with, and we're happy to help. And again, I'll actually put my contact information in the chat now. There's 2 ways to reach me. There's a more general email box, and I'll put my email in there as well. So feel free to reach out if you have any further questions regarding our work.
Great, thank you. Emily, do you mind going to the eTeach New York website? And you know this website so well, so I'll let you take people through it, some of the highlights.
Sure. So, one of the highlights Paul already touched on, which is the training opportunities, which are also available on our site. So I'll just jump there quickly. There's a link at the top, PD Calendar and News, where you can just get a quick glance at the trainings that are coming up first and foremost. All of those are linked directly here, so you can jump right into the My Learning Plan to register. As Paul and Lynn have said, we encourage you to take advantage of these opportunities. We're going to continue populating this calendar with trainings that are happening all over the state as those come into us. So right now you can see, about the next couple of weeks worth, but that will continue to get fleshed out, continuing into the early summer months, I believe, as we move forward, those trainings will continue. So just to jump back out to the homepage, just to show you a little bit about the site, we have our 6 buckets, as we sometimes call them, prominently here, the 6 areas of focus for this grant. And as we jump into one of these, we will be able to see clearly direct links to each of the modules that have been presented so far, or in this case, some of the ones that are upcoming. So the idea of the website is to provide easy access for anyone who wants to access these materials. So we wanted to be able to present them in a platform agnostic way, whether your school district or whether you use Google, whether you use Apple products, whether you use Microsoft. We want to make sure that that's not going to be a barrier to you accessing the material. So the bulk of the information associated with these modules, we will find presented right here on the website. There are some links out to some other materials, but for the most part, we wanted to make it easy for someone to share this information with a single link, so that if you wanted to share these resources with a colleague, with people that you work with, you could provide them with a single link and say, here's all the materials from Module 4. Now, of course, if someone wants to get their CTLE credit associated with this module, they would look for the trainings that are associated with it. We've grouped those by subject area right here on the landing page. So if someone were interested in upcoming trainings related to students with disabilities, for example, they would find them right here on this page. And that's true for each of our areas of focus. And for many of our content areas, we have some additional resources provided here too. These are things that our partners felt were essential to the understanding of their area of focus, just to further support the field in supporting their students in remote and hybrid learning environments, so that we have a rich store of information around these content areas. We have contact information here on the website, but I will also drop Lynn's email into the chat here in just a moment. But we tried to keep the website as easy to navigate as possible so that it's as easy as possible for people to get the resources that they need in the field to support them in these learning environments.
Emily, thanks so much. And Paul, thank you. If you have questions, you can throw them in the chat and we'll answer them. But I'm going to ask everybody in our last 5 minutes, best advice for teachers during this time. And so we'll just start. Anybody want to be the brave one to go first, or do you want me to just start calling on you?
I'll go, Lynn.
Okay, thanks, Katie.
Sure. I say be open, be brave, be able to change quickly, and then be able to reflect on the experience that you had and take it and make it something better the next time.
And to go along with that, cut yourself some slack. Teachers are working so hard. I have a lot of friends who are teachers. They're killing themselves. And, you know, it's okay to not have all the answers and to try things and to cut yourself a break.
100% agreement there, and stay healthy. I have had to build in so many different ways to get up, stretch, move around the room, and think about surrounding yourself with positive influences and uplifting relationships. It is way too easy to fall into and focus on what is negative. More than ever. It's a general teacher room, banter, but it's gone past that at certain points here, understandably. But if we're looking to kind of hit the ground running in a positive way, maintain healthy relationships and maintain your own health.
Yeah, and I'll build on that. A lot of this work, and I've shared this in multiple forums, is about hearts and minds and centering ourselves and remembering, why we became educators. The world is going through this time period, so we're all going to work together and support each other. But trusting how you feel in your heart and knowing that this work is good for our future generations.
I'll just say that content is not king right now, right? Make sure that you're developing those relationships as we've all discussed here, and focusing on your students, having empathy with your students, because as difficult a year as we've had, they have had a difficult year also. So we're all in this together, and make sure you're focusing on the kids.
And you all said it so beautifully and exactly. These are kids. These are children. They didn't ask for this, and, they are developing the skills that, as adults we have and we struggle with. They're still developing it. So thank you for all the educators and all the administrators and all the parents that are doing everything that you're doing. We really appreciate it. We really hope that you take advantage of these free resources. Again, this is some of the best work I have seen in my time in education. And I want to shout out not only to April and Katie, but there are 4 other colleagues that are working on the other buckets, as we call them. And this team here, who's been amazing to work with, and our 30 BOCES and 10 RICs that have been wonderful for getting this information out. So it is 4:58. We will stay on. Jerry, I want to thank everyone at SUNY Albany. I personally want to shout out and thank you. You have been doing this for a year. I was there with you when you said we have to fill the void now that we're in a pandemic. So thank you for doing that. And Kelly Maslin, thank you for jumping on and supporting this work through Capital Region BOCES. So again, thank you everybody for coming. And if there are questions, we'll answer them. If not, enjoy your evening.